Let's begin with a hard truth, one that millions are bumping up against over and over again. The frustration you feel in your growth journey is not because you lack motivation. It's not because you need another productivity system, another goal planner, or another morning routine. It's not even because you're not trying hard enough. The reason you're stuck is far more foundational. You've been taught to think about reality, your goals, your habits, your identity, as if they unfold on a straight line. Step A leads to step B. Progress is measured by how much you push. The more effort you apply, the more results you get. That model made sense when we thought the universe was a machine. But that model is breaking. Everywhere you look, people are working harder than ever. They're optimizing everything. Their diet, their calendars, their apps, their sleep. And yet, burnout rates are skyrocketing. Mental clarity is tanking. Direction feels muddled. People are running faster on a treadmill that's accelerating beneath their feet and not realizing the problem isn't speed. It's the track itself. The traditional self-improvement model is broken because it's operating inside the wrong framework of reality. It assumes that time is linear, identity is fixed, and change is a direct function of repetition and willpower. But what if all of those assumptions are outdated? What if reality doesn't unfold in straight lines, but in probabilities? What if the version of you that already has the results you're chasing already exists not in some metaphorical way, but in a very real, energetic structure of possibility? And what if you're not meant to chase it down, but to synchronize with it? That's where quantum self-evolution comes in. We're stepping beyond the outdated formulas of hustle and grind and into the architecture of how reality actually works, through resonance, coherence, and timeline alignment. In this video, we're not just talking about philosophy. We're not sugarcoating science. We're unpacking the single quantum principle that, once understood, will transform how you approach personal growth forever. Because if you don't understand this principle, self-improvement becomes like trying to fine-tune a radio using a hammer. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you're using the wrong tool. Now, you may have heard terms like manifestation, vibration, and alignment thrown around in spiritual circles. But this isn't about trend words. This is about reclaiming the true mechanics behind transformation, something far more precise than wishful thinking and far more powerful than repetition. It starts with understanding how reality actually behaves, not how it appears to behave when filtered through centuries of linear thinking. We'll explore how consciousness interacts with probabilistic fields. We'll decode how identity isn't built through steps, but tuned through energetic states. And we'll show why the most powerful changes in your life aren't created, they're selected. Selected through clarity, through precision, through resonance. This is not about mystical abstraction. This is about logic rooted in the quantum nature of reality. And once you learn to think in these terms, you'll start to see why so many traditional systems have failed you. You weren't lazy. You weren't broken. You were aligned with the wrong framework. Throughout this video, we'll guide you through the deeper architecture behind timelines, coherence, frequency-based identity, and more. We'll unpack why trying harder doesn't work if you're energetically out of phase with the outcome you're trying to reach. We'll challenge the myth of attraction and replace it with the precision of resonance. Most importantly, we'll uncover the quantum principle at the heart of transformation. Because once that principle clicks into place, everything changes. So if you've ever felt like self-improvement just doesn't click for you, this isn't a flaw. It's a sign that you're ready for the next paradigm. Let's begin. You've likely set goals before, visualized success, made the vision board, written the affirmations, taken the steps, and yet, somewhere between intention and result, something slips. It's not always dramatic. It's subtle. A drift, a delay, a weird inertia that doesn't quite make sense. You know what you want. You're not even resisting it, but it's not locking in. That misfire isn't random. It's the result of operating inside an invisible architecture of reality you haven't been taught to perceive. Let's start here. Your goals already exist. Not just as ideas, not just as mental concepts, but as actual energetic structures within a probability field. Every version of you, the one who has the dream job, the one who has the peaceful relationships, the one who has unlocked creative genius, they all exist in parallel potentials. The quantum field isn't poetic language. It's the very space that underpins what we call material life. And within that field, reality doesn't unfold like a timeline. It behaves like a network of outcomes, each one available but not all activated. So when you say, I want to achieve X, what you're really doing is aiming to tune your consciousness into the version of reality where that outcome is resolved. But here's where the glitch happens. Most people approach this process like they're climbing a ladder. They think they need to earn that version through force, through action, through repetition, through progress. They don't realize it's not about building a staircase to the outcome. It's about learning to resonate with it. Think of the quantum field like a massive multidimensional radio. Each station represents a reality timeline. Each station broadcasts a version of you, complete with its own habits, thoughts, emotions, and external circumstances. Tuning the dial doesn't create the station. It selects it. This is the first fracture between traditional self-help models and quantum self-evolution. The old model tells you, push forward through steps, and you'll arrive. But in a probabilistic universe, arriving is not linear, it's vibrational. The reason people fail to achieve their goals is not because the goal is out of reach. It's because they're operating on a frequency that's incompatible with the outcome they seek. The mismatch isn't mental, it's energetic. And until the frequency aligns, the outcome remains uncollapsible. This is where people begin to misunderstand the quantum field. They think it's about visualizing something until it magically appears. But resonance is not magic. It's physics. Now let's add another layer. Every belief you hold emits a frequency. Every emotion you experience adds texture to that signal. Every action you take, if not congruent with that frequency, distorts the signal further. So if you say, I want financial freedom, but your belief is money is hard to earn, and your daily emotion is anxiety, and your actions are born from scarcity, then you're emitting a scrambled frequency that doesn't match the reality where financial freedom is stable. That reality can't resolve. Not because you're being punished, but because physics can't stabilize what isn't energetically coherent. The truth is, your goals don't need to be attracted. They are already there, waiting, broadcasting, anchored in their own stable timelines. The question is not, how do I make it happen? The question is, what frequency does that version of me operate on, and how do I match it? This reorients the entire approach to transformation. It's not about adding more. It's about subtracting noise. It's not about pushing forward. It's about tuning inward. Now some will ask, does this mean I don't need to act? Absolutely not. Action is vital, but only when it's the byproduct of alignment. If action emerges from force, it distorts the signal. If action flows from frequency, it amplifies the signal. You'll know the difference by the quality of movement. One feels heavy, erratic, exhausting. The other feels precise, crisp, inevitable. To work with the hidden architecture of reality, you must train yourself to sense resonance. This means observing when your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are coherent with the reality you seek, or when they're entangled with a past frequency loop. This is not mental discipline. It's energetic awareness. The better you get at it, the more rapidly your external world will shift to reflect your tuning. Because outcomes don't respond to effort. They respond to coherence. Next, we will explore why willpower, so often glorified in the self-improvement world, actually fails in quantum systems, and how your attention collapses realities in ways most people never consciously realize. Let's go further. Willpower has been worshipped as the cornerstone of transformation for decades. You hear it everywhere, from life coaches, from personal trainers, from peak performance gurus. Discipline is everything. No excuses. Just push through. The narrative is loud, convincing, almost unquestionable. And yet, in the quiet spaces of people's lives, something's off. Despite the constant effort, they relapse, they hesitate, they stall, not because they don't care, but because something invisible is counteracting their push, something deeper than motivation. Let's start by identifying the underlying assumption that traditional models rely on: that behavior leads reality, that if you act a certain way long enough, results will follow. But quantum mechanics shows us a different story, one where observation doesn't follow change. It initiates it. To understand why this matters, we need to look at the observer effect. In quantum physics, particles exist in a probabilistic state, waves of potential, until they're observed. Once observed, they collapse into a specific state. This isn't abstract. It's fundamental. The act of observing reality shapes reality. Now apply that to your consciousness. Your attention is not passive. It's participatory. Every time you focus on a goal, you're interacting with the field of potential outcomes. But here's the key. Your observation doesn't just collapse reality based on desire. Collapses it based on frequency. This is where willpower begins to crack. Because willpower is usually an act of force against internal resistance. You try to override an internal pattern by pushing harder. But that act of force reinforces the signal of conflict. So even while you're trying to do the right thing, your energetic frequency is still broadcasting struggle. And struggle collapses timelines consistent with more struggle. Let's say you're trying to build a habit of waking early to write a book. You push yourself out of bed every morning with determination. But internally, you resent the process. You feel disconnected from the identity of author. You don't yet believe this is who you are. So while you're showing up, the signal is mixed. The wave you collapse through attention is filled with contradiction. And over time, your body, your motivation, your clarity, they all short-circuit. Not because you're lazy, but because your effort was out of alignment. The outcome didn't stabilize. The pattern didn't lock in. And eventually, willpower gives way to fatigue. This is why people burn out chasing goals they want. Because the conscious desire is mismatched with the unconscious frequency. They're observing the outcome they want, but from the vibration of lack, doubt, or force. So they collapse a reality that mirrors exactly that: friction, uncertainty, and delay. In quantum self-evolution, this becomes a critical turning point. You stop chasing alignment through discipline and start resolving it through resonance. This isn't mental trickery. It's energetic precision. Because when your internal frequency harmonizes with the outcome you're observing, the wave collapses with congruence. And you shift timelines not through effort but through clarity. Now let's address a common objection. So I shouldn't try at all? That's not the point. Action isn't removed from the equation. But it must emerge as a reflection of alignment, not as compensation for misalignment. You can't fake coherence with brute repetition. You either match the frequency of your outcome or you don't. Everything else is noise. This is why people sometimes experience sudden, unexpected breakthroughs after months of stagnation. Not because they changed their strategy, but because something internally clicked into resonance. The resistance dropped, the signal cleared, and reality responded. That shift couldn't have been forced. It had to be tuned. Let's bring this into a grounded process. When approaching any goal, ask yourself, am I observing this outcome through a lens of lack or already? Are my emotions congruent with the reality where this result already exists? Are my actions expressions of alignment or attempts to fix misalignment? If the answer to any of these reveals dissonance, your first task isn't to act harder. It's to restore energetic consistency. You're not collapsing potential through action alone. You're collapsing it through coherence, through frequency stabilization, through attention that carries no distortion. And once that clarity sets in, willpower becomes almost irrelevant. Because you're no longer forcing movement through misalignment. You're becoming the version of you that no longer needs to be convinced. That version doesn't need to try. It moves with inevitability, because it's already resolved. Next, we will explore how the universe responds not to the force of your effort, but to the frequency of your identity. This is where quantum resonance replaces Newtonian effort as the new model of transformation. Let's move forward. Everything is vibration. That's not philosophy, it's physics. Atoms are mostly empty space, they're components in constant motion. That motion generates frequency. That frequency carries information. And that information structures reality. Now zoom out. Your thoughts, your emotions, your body are emitting a frequency field. It's not conceptual. It's measurable. And that frequency field interacts with other fields. It synchronizes, clashes, it harmonizes, it distorts. This interaction forms the basis of your experienced reality. So when people try to change their life, but ignore the frequency they're emitting, they're fighting physics with psychology. And they lose every time. Traditional self-help is built on Newtonian logic. Action equals reaction. Discipline equals success. Force equals movement. But the quantum field doesn't operate on force. It operates on resonance. Resonance doesn't require strain. It requires specificity. Here's the distinction. Force is a blunt instrument. It's reactive. It's compensatory. You feel misaligned, so you try to push through it. You feel stuck, so you double your effort. You treat the misalignment as a barrier to be bulldozed. But that approach ignores the feedback loop, because the very need to apply force is a signal of dissonance. Resonance, on the other hand, is about tuning. It's quiet. It's precise. It doesn't fight resistance. It adjusts the frequency so that resistance dissolves. In the quantum model, you shift not by pushing reality, but by matching its signal. Let's bring this into a practical frame. Think of a musical instrument. If you pluck a guitar string tuned to E, and another string is tuned to E on a nearby instrument, it will begin to vibrate on its own. Not because you struck it, but because of sympathetic resonance. That's how the quantum field works. Your identity is like a string. When its frequency matches a timeline or outcome, that outcome is drawn into coherence. It starts vibrating with you not because you earned it, but because you're compatible. Now let's examine the grind mentality. Grinding is based on low bandwidth strategy. You take massive action from a distorted identity. It works sometimes, but at high cost. It burns energy, creates friction. It invites self-sabotage. And even if it succeeds, the identity that achieved it is often unsustainable. Because it didn't evolve through coherence. It adapted through tension. In contrast, frequency-based identity shifts are exponential. They may begin subtly through new thought patterns, new emotional patterns, new perceptual anchors. But once the new frequency stabilizes, the external shifts compound rapidly. It's not always visible at first. That's why people dismiss it. But internally, the field is recalibrating. And when it locks in, outcomes shift seemingly overnight. Not because you tried harder, but because the version of you who lives that outcome became your baseline frequency. You don't move through reality. Realities move through you. You're not the traveler. You're the tuning fork. And whichever reality matches your resonance is the one that shows up. This rewrites the entire premise of effort. Effort is not inherently bad. But when it's used to override frequency misalignment, it's inefficient. Like yelling at a radio to change stations instead of turning the dial. So instead of asking, how hard do I need to work? Ask, how clearly am I tuned? Because clarity of signal always outperforms quantity of effort. There's a word for this in advanced systems thinking: leverage. Leverage is what happens when small inputs produce large results. Frequency tuning is the ultimate form of leverage. Because with one internal shift, you can activate a completely different sequence of external events. Without strain, without burnout, without contradiction. Now some people resist this idea. They think it sounds too easy. But ease isn't the same as laziness. Ease is what happens when resistance is removed. When distortion is cleared. When force is replaced by frequency. This doesn't mean life becomes passive. It means it becomes frictionless. Because you're no longer in opposition to your outcomes. You're harmonized with them. So what does this look like in practice? It starts with awareness. Become conscious of your energetic field. Not just your emotions, but your expectations, beliefs, and identity templates. What are you radiating? What assumptions are encoded in your daily thoughts? Then refine. Not through intensity, but through precision. Align your inputs, mental, emotional, behavioral, to match the identity that belongs to the outcome you seek. And sustain that alignment long enough for the field to stabilize. This doesn't require perfection. It requires consistency. Frequency shifts compound. Each aligned thought reinforces the wave. Each congruent decision locks the pattern deeper into your field, until eventually, the shift becomes irreversible. Not because you forced it, but because you resonated with it long enough to collapse it into your experience. Next, we will examine the true nature of identity, not as something you build from scratch, but as a selector mechanism embedded in the quantum field, and how your current identity bandwidth may be limiting what timelines are even available to you. Stay tuned. Change doesn't begin with habits. It doesn't begin with goals. It doesn't even begin with desire. Change begins and ends with identity. Not the surface-level stories you tell about who you are, but the frequency signature your field broadcasts, every moment, underneath your thoughts. That signal is not shaped by what you say you want. It's shaped by what you believe you are. Here's the part most people never question. They think identity is something they build. They treat it like a project, something you sculpt piece by piece. But in the quantum framework, identity isn't constructed. It's selected, because the field already holds every possible version of you. And the one that activates isn't the one you work toward, it's the one you resonate with. Think of identity as a frequency filter. It determines which signals from the field become stable in your reality. Everything else, your goals, your habits, your relationships, is downstream. When your identity shifts, your life reorders. Not randomly, but automatically, because new identity equals new resonance equals new timelines. So if you're trying to change your life while anchored in the same identity bandwidth, you're trying to override the selector with brute force. And even if you succeed temporarily, the field will pull you back to congruence. Because the quantum field doesn't respond to outcomes. It responds to coherence. Let's say someone wants to become fit. They follow a workout plan. They track calories. They set goals. But if their core identity is still rooted in "I'm not athletic, I've always struggled with my weight," or "this isn't who I really am," then that identity broadcasts a conflicting signal. And no matter how precise the strategy is, that misalignment becomes an energetic drag. Progress stalls, momentum collapses, and the old identity reasserts itself. Because the field resolves according to what's most stable, energetically, not mentally. Most personal growth fails for this reason. It focuses on behavior, on tactics, on external shifts, but the internal selector identity is left untouched. And until that shifts, the field cannot maintain a new configuration. It's not being stubborn, it's being precise. This brings us to a core quantum truth. You are not becoming someone new. You are selecting who you already are within the field. Every version of you is accessible. The confident one, the disciplined one, the abundant one, the peaceful one. You don't build them, you stabilize them through coherence, through attention, through emotional reinforcement. And the moment that version becomes more energetically dominant than the old one, reality updates. So how do you update identity without faking it? Not through affirmation overload or fake confidence, but through conscious reinforcement of energetic patterns. Start by identifying what the current identity is broadcasting. Not just your self-talk, but your autopilot emotions, your unconscious decisions, your assumptions. That's your default broadcast. Now, isolate the identity version that matches the reality you want. Ask, what does that version believe without hesitation? What emotional states are natural to them, not forced? What decisions are obvious to them, not strategic? Then begin emitting that frequency not just in thought but in action, attention, and response. Not to fake it, but to establish coherence. At first, the field resists, because the old identity has historical inertia. It's been reinforced for years, decades. But as you consistently generate the new signal, the old pattern begins to weaken. The feedback loop shifts. Your environment reacts differently. People respond to you differently. You feel drawn to different behaviors, not because you're forcing it, but because the new identity makes them obvious. This is where most people begin to feel the shift. Subtle but unmistakable. Not a change in effort, a change in gravity. Here's the quantum nuance. You're not just changing what you think, you're changing what the field can stabilize. Because identity isn't a concept. It's a carrier wave. And when that carrier wave shifts, your entire experience reorganizes around it. Effort becomes aligned. Synchronicity accelerates. Resistance drops. Not because you worked harder, but because you stopped broadcasting distortion. There's no need to fight for a new life. There's only a need to stabilize the identity that already matches it. Everything else becomes recalibration. Next, we will uncover the single quantum principle that governs every shift you've ever experienced, and every breakthrough you've ever chased. It's the most important frequency in your entire energetic field. And once it's stabilized, nothing remains the same. We continue. Here it is. The quantum principle that underpins every transformation, every breakthrough, every timeline shift you will ever experience. Coherence. Not belief, not action, not desire. Coherence. It is the master key of personal evolution. And without it, no amount of effort can stabilize change. Let's get clear on what this actually means. In quantum systems, coherence is the state where all parts of a system operate in phase, meaning they reinforce each other's signal rather than interfering. Incoherence creates noise. Coherence creates signal strength. When a system is coherent, it becomes exponentially more powerful than the sum of its parts. This isn't theoretical. It's measurable. Laser beams operate through coherence. Atomic clocks synchronize through coherence. And consciousness transforms reality through coherence. Your identity, your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions are all emitting energy. If they are out of sync, misaligned, contradictory, unstable, then your signal is chaotic. And the quantum field cannot stabilize chaos, can only stabilize structure. So if your frequency field is fragmented, no timeline can resolve around it. And any progress you make will be unsustainable. Not because you're flawed, but because the signal lacks structural integrity. Now flip the model. When your internal system is coherent, when your beliefs, emotions, and behaviors reinforce the same energetic message, then your signal becomes clean, clear, potent, and the field responds instantly, not because it's being manipulated, but because you are finally operating as a stable source. This is why people who are deeply aligned seem to move through life effortlessly. They're not avoiding obstacles, they're not generating them. Because their internal architecture is no longer broadcasting contradiction. They have nothing to push against. Because they are no longer the source of resistance. Coherence removes friction from your field. That doesn't mean you stop growing. It means your growth becomes stable. You're no longer chasing your future. You're anchoring it. And every thought, feeling, and behavior becomes a harmonic reinforcement of that state. Let's be practical. If you say, I want to be confident, but internally doubt yourself, that's incoherence. If you act confident, but fear rejection with every move, that's incoherence. If you affirm belief but seek constant validation, incoherence. In each case, the field doesn't know which signal to stabilize. So it reflects the dominant frequency, which is confusion. Now shift into coherence. You believe you're capable. You feel trust in your decisions. You act without over-explaining or shrinking. That alignment emits a clean signal, and that signal interacts with the field as truth. And the reality it reflects back is confirmation. Here's what coherence is not. It's not perfection. It's not fake positivity. It's not mental gymnastics. Coherence is structural. It's a frequency where internal contradiction has been resolved, not hidden. And once that resolution locks in, you become magnetic. Not because you're trying to be, but because your signal is too clear to ignore. This is the reason aligned people attract aligned experiences. It's not mystical. It's mechanical. The field is matching frequency density with timeline stability, and coherent systems stabilize rapidly. Now ask yourself, where are you broadcasting incoherence? Where do you want something that your identity doesn't match? Where do you act in ways that contradict your stated goals? Where are you emotionally at odds with what you claim to be pursuing? That's where your progress is leaking, not because your strategy is wrong, but because your system is fractured. Reclaiming coherence is not about fixing all your flaws. It's about aligning your entire being around the version of you that no longer struggles with those contradictions. That version exists, and its signal is already in the field. Your job is to harmonize with it. To do that, audit your beliefs. Strip away anything that weakens or contradicts your chosen identity. Stabilize your emotional range. Don't repress emotions, but neutralize patterns that consistently destabilize your state. Align behavior not through performance but through pattern reinforcement. The more aligned you are internally, the less chaos you project externally, and the faster the field stabilizes new outcomes. There is no self-improvement without coherence. Only temporary motion, temporary results, temporary hope. If you want sustained transformation, you must become a coherent field. Because reality doesn't respond to how much you want something. It responds to how clearly you embody it. Next, we will unpack how your old identities, through entanglement, are still distorting your present field, and how to release those feedback loops that keep pulling you into outdated timelines. We go further. Let's turn to a concept that explains why so many people feel like they're dragging invisible weight behind them. Why, no matter how far they think they've come, something keeps pulling them backward. Quantum entanglement. In physics, it describes how two particles, once connected, continue to affect each other no matter how far apart they are in space. They mirror each other instantaneously. That same principle plays out in consciousness. And in your identity field, it's more common than most realize. You are entangled with versions of yourself that no longer exist physically, but still exist energetically. Old beliefs, old habits, old emotional patterns, old environments, old self-images. These don't just fade with time. They persist in the field like open tabs in your energetic system. And as long as they remain unresolved, they create interference. That interference forms what can be described as a feedback loop, a recurring signal that keeps reintroducing outdated patterns into your current experience. This is why people keep repeating the same mistakes after moving on. Why someone can leave a toxic relationship and attract the same dynamic in a new person. Why someone can break a habit only to relapse months later when stress hits. It's not just psychological memory, it's energetic entanglement. You may have intellectually outgrown the past, but if your field is still linked to a prior identity frequency, the feedback loop remains open, and that loop sends signals through your decisions, your triggers, your preferences, your self-image. Signals that don't match who you're trying to become. Let's be clear, this isn't your fault. The human system is designed to form patterned resonance with identity states. Once stabilized, those states self-reinforce. So when you lived in fear, shame, confusion, or unworthiness for years, your field didn't just experience those states. It stabilized them. And unless consciously disentangled, those patterns linger. They create energetic drag. They slow timeline transitions. And they corrupt the coherence you're trying to build. To move forward, you don't just need to define who you're becoming. You need to release who you're entangled with. That doesn't mean erasing your past. It means severing the outdated identity link that's still broadcasting from it. Start by becoming aware of which patterns feel like yours, but aren't yours anymore. That's the first sign of entanglement. Familiarity without resonance. You recognize the emotion, but it no longer fits. You feel the pull, but it no longer aligns. You notice the trigger, but it's not grounded in your current reality. These are echoes, energetic remnants trying to reassert identity control. Not because they're malicious, but because they've been dominant for so long, and your field is still treating them as relevant. Now comes the release. This is not done through suppression. You don't override these patterns. You resolve them. Resolution requires acknowledgement, precision, intentional detachment. Bring the entangled pattern into conscious awareness. Name it, track its origin, identify how long it's been active, then declare out loud clearly that this pattern is no longer your identity source. This moment of declaration isn't symbolic. It's functional, because spoken intention clarifies frequency, and the field listens. Follow that with a behavioral shift. Do anything that contradicts the pattern in real time. This action doesn't need to be massive. It just needs to be clean. Why? Because frequency-based detachment requires a new signal to take its place. And that signal becomes the seed of the replacement pattern. Over time, as you respond to old triggers with new patterns, the entanglement weakens. The field begins to receive new reinforcement, and the old loop collapses. This is why identity reinvention is less about adding new skills and more about removing old resonance. Because as long as those loops are active, they hijack your coherence. You can meditate every day, journal every night, visualize every morning. But if the field is still entangled with a lesser self, your upgrades will short-circuit. Not because they're invalid, but because the interference is stronger than the signal. Here's the power you must reclaim. You are not entangled by force. You're entangled by repetition. And repetition can be interrupted. You have the capacity to release identity fragments that no longer serve you. And the moment you do, you reclaim bandwidth, energetic clarity, mental space, emotional sovereignty. You don't need to fight your past. You need to stop broadcasting it. And once the field recognizes that the entanglement is inactive, it stops reflecting it back into your life. Next, we will unlock how timelines work in probabilistic space. And how your current struggles aren't blockages, they're misalignments to a timeline you never had to be on in the first place. Let's move forward. You're not stuck. You're just tuned into a timeline that doesn't want you. Let that sink in. Because the illusion of being stuck is one of the most disempowering distortions in the human experience. It tricks you into believing that the current version of reality is fixed, that it must be solved, endured, escaped. But in the quantum framework, reality isn't linear. It's selectable. And being stuck is not a condition. It's a broadcast. Timelines exist as probable pathways, vibrational trajectories that unfold based on frequency alignment. Each version of you follows its own path, anchored to its own unique energetic configuration. And what you perceive as your current life is simply the expression of the frequency you're stabilizing. You didn't end up here by chance. You ended up here because your internal frequency field tuned into this version, and it's stabilized. So when you feel resistance, confusion, dissatisfaction, it's not a sign that life is against you. It's a signal that you're misaligned with the timeline you're broadcasting, that the frequency you're operating on is holding you in place. And no matter how much you wish for change, the field is obeying coherence, not desire. The good news is that timelines are not cemented. They are fluid. And the moment you shift your broadcast, emotionally, mentally, behaviorally, the field reorients. It doesn't care about your past. It cares about your present signal. And when that signal matches a different outcome, the path reorganizes. Not gradually, structurally. So the question isn't, how do I escape this situation? The real question is, what version of me doesn't even experience this situation? And how can I begin acting, thinking, and feeling from that identity now? That's timeline tuning. It's not about grinding through the current version of reality. It's about disrupting the signal that's sustaining it. Disruption is not chaos. It's recalibration. You interrupt the existing pattern, not with force, but with clarity. You change the broadcast, and the timeline changes with it. Start by mapping out the version of you that aligns with the desired timeline. What choices feel automatic for them? What relationships support their coherence? What environments feed their stability? What thoughts are irrelevant to them, not because they conquered them, but because they're obsolete? This becomes your template, not your aspiration, your standard. And every moment you act from that standard, the signal gets stronger. Now track your current signal for inconsistencies. Where are you still responding based on the old timeline? What habits are anchoring you to the outdated version of you? What decisions are being made from fear, scarcity, or guilt? Each of those is a reinforcement anchor, and they're optional. The shift begins when you stop waiting for permission to live as your future self. When you stop asking the present timeline for approval before abandoning it. The timeline doesn't give you that. You shift by leaving it unceremoniously, and that departure is internal. The field notices and realigns accordingly. Now, this doesn't mean external change is instant, but the trajectory is. The moment you begin transmitting a new identity frequency, you enter a new probability stream. The old reality may take time to collapse, but it's already in decay, and the new one is already initializing. Be warned, this shift feels disorienting at first, because your nervous system is still acclimated to the previous timeline. Your body remembers the tension, the habits, the survival scripts, but that memory doesn't dictate your reality. Only your signal does. To stabilize the new timeline, you must outlast the temptation to return. That means rejecting the invitation to react as the old self, to fear the gap, to doubt the unknown. You'll be tested not by the universe, but by your own echoes. And each time you reaffirm your new frequency, the old ones lose power. This is not metaphor. This is how probability resolves. You are the tuning device, and the field is always listening. When your signal changes, your direction changes. And when your direction changes, your life follows. The struggle ends where precision begins. And with timeline tuning, precision is everything. Not perfection, precision. Because you don't need to fix the old timeline. You only need to stop feeding it. Next, we will break the myth of attraction and replace it with the actual mechanism that governs the outcomes you align with. Let's keep moving. Let's clear the air. Manifestation isn't what you've been sold. It's not vision boards, high-vibe playlists, or scripting journals done under a full moon. It's not chanting affirmations until your throat is sore. These practices aren't inherently bad, but they've been misunderstood. They've been packaged into rituals that confuse the process of manifestation with the mechanics of quantum reality. And that confusion has created frustration on a massive scale. People try to attract what they want: wealth, love, clarity, opportunity, but end up amplifying scarcity. Why? Because the foundation is flawed. They're trying to pull outcomes into their current vibration, rather than shifting their vibration to align with the version of reality where the outcome is already resolved. And that's the difference between attraction and resonance. One is externally focused. The other is structurally embodied. In truth, the idea of attracting something suggests that you're separate from it, that it exists outside of you, waiting to be pulled into your field. But in quantum terms, that separation doesn't exist. There is no external pulling force. There is only energetic compatibility. Either your frequency matches the configuration of a timeline, or it doesn't. That's it. The concept of attraction is a symptom of Newtonian thinking, the idea that something must be drawn toward you through invisible force. But in the quantum model, you don't draw things toward you. You collapse them into coherence by tuning into their signal. And if you're not tuned to the right signal, the outcome can't stabilize. It's not because you're blocked. It's because you're broadcasting distortion. This is where traditional manifestation teachings begin to fall apart. They often encourage people to focus on the what without reconfiguring the who. People are told to think about their dream house, their ideal income, their soulmate, but they do so while still vibrating at the frequency of lack. So even as they visualize abundance, they're energetically confirming that they don't have it. The result? They collapse a version of reality that mirrors that energetic state: continued lack, longing, and delay. Now let's reset the frame. Resonance doesn't deal in hopes or wishes. It deals in stability. You get what you're stable in, not what you beg for, not what you script about, not what you think about 10 times a day. If your identity doesn't match the timeline where the result is resolved, then that timeline remains inaccessible. And no amount of law of attraction journaling will override that. So if you're trying to manifest something, stop asking, how can I get it? Instead, ask, who is the version of me who lives inside that outcome? And how do I become that? This isn't about pretending. It's about structural alignment. It's not about forcing. It's about collapsing timelines through coherent frequency. Let's say you want to manifest financial freedom. If you're still acting out of survival, making decisions from scarcity, checking your bank account in fear, and repeating, I am wealthy while still vibrating anxiety, then your resonance isn't matching the outcome. You're not manifesting money. You're amplifying lack. And the field, being neutral, stabilizes that signal. Now contrast that with resonance matching. You step into the identity of the version of you who already lives in financial stability. You feel the safety. You think from surplus. You act with grounded clarity, not fantasy. And over time, you become a clean match for the outcome. Not through wishing, through stabilizing. That's how the field responds. Not to desire, but to coherence. Here's another example, love. People often try to manifest love while rooted in abandonment wounds, insecurity, and attachment seeking. So the signal they emit is not partnership, it's deficiency. And the field mirrors that back. Partners who don't stay. Relationships that echo trauma. Cycles that feel familiar but not fulfilling. Because the timeline they want can't anchor if the self hasn't stabilized the frequency of worth. This is not judgment. This is structural truth. The quantum field doesn't respond to longing. It responds to identity. And identity is the tuning fork for every outcome in your life. Now, this doesn't mean you need to be perfect, but you need to be clean. Clean in your signal. Clean in your self-perception. Clean in the emotional architecture you operate from. That's when reality starts matching you, because you've stopped chasing it. Here's the new standard for manifestation. Stop trying to get it. Start becoming the version of you who doesn't need to. Because in the quantum field, needing equals not having equals signal distortion. And resonance equals stability equals timeline access. Practical application. Identify the outcome you seek. Not as fantasy, but as a probable version of reality. Map the version of yourself who already lives inside that timeline. Observe how that version thinks, feels, moves, and responds. Begin making micro shifts into that identity daily, consistently. Refuse to reinforce signals of misalignment, even when old timelines echo back. This is resonance matching, and it outperforms attraction by orders of magnitude. Next, we will uncover how habits don't just build success. They anchor identity frequencies that rewrite the architecture of your personal field. We continue. You've been told that habits are the building blocks of success. But in the quantum framework, habits are much more than that. They're tuning mechanisms. Each habit you repeat, consciously or unconsciously, broadcasts a frequency. That frequency reinforces an identity state. And that identity state determines which version of reality stabilizes around you. This isn't motivation science. This is quantum mechanics applied to self-patterning. So when people ask, how do I become a different person? The answer is not in major life overhauls. It's in microharmonic shifts that gradually retune the field. Because reality doesn't change when you hit a goal. Reality changes when you stabilize a new identity, and habits are the anchor points of that stabilization. Let's break it down. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. You are not even your actions in isolation. You are the pattern those inputs reinforce over time. That pattern becomes your dominant resonance. And the quantum field mirrors that resonance with extreme precision. So if your habits contradict your desired identity, then your field is locked in conflict. Let's say you want to become a powerful, confident creator. You visualize clarity. You speak affirmations. But your daily habits include scrolling for hours, avoiding decisions, second-guessing your ideas, and drowning in mental noise. Then what does the field receive? A fragmented signal, a distorted frequency, an incoherent identity broadcast. And the result? a reality that reflects those very distortions back at you. Now flip that. Introduce a series of small, aligned behaviors that match the identity of a grounded creator. Writing every morning without waiting for inspiration. Making decisions from clarity, not emotion. Turning off digital distractions during peak hours. Speaking your ideas with conviction, not disclaimers. These aren't dramatic changes, but they are coherent ones. And coherence is what stabilizes timelines. This is the power of quantum habits. They're not about success. They're about signature. Each habit you adopt either strengthens or weakens the signature you're broadcasting into the field. And that signature is what determines the version of reality you experience. The biggest myth in behavior change is that repetition leads to results. That's only partially true. Repetition without resonance creates burnout. But repetition with resonance creates identity. And identity creates alignment. This is why willpower alone fails. Because if the behavior doesn't match the frequency of who you believe you are, it creates internal resistance. And that resistance feeds the old timeline. To break that loop, you need frequency-based habits. Habits chosen not for productivity, but for resonance. Not because they make you better, but because they stabilize who you actually are beyond conditioning. This shifts the question from, what habits do successful people have? To, what habits match the version of me I'm stabilizing? That's a precision tool. Begin with 3 questions. What version of reality am I currently experiencing? What behaviors are reinforcing it, intentionally or accidentally? What behaviors would feel obvious to the identity I'm upgrading into? From there, you design habits not as tasks but as tuning inputs, each one an act of quantum reinforcement. Here's the key. It doesn't matter how small the habit is. If it's aligned with your target identity, it carries disproportionate power. Because in quantum systems, small shifts, when repeated with coherence, generate exponential results. That's leverage. You don't need to master every detail of your day. You need to become consistent in reinforcing the right field. The field that matches your upgraded identity. And once that becomes the dominant broadcast, the outer reality reconfigures. Automatically. Habits are not a strategy. They're a signal. And when that signal becomes clean, you stop trying to become the person you envision. You stabilize as that person. And the universe has no choice but to respond accordingly. Next, we will explore why vague goals create distortion, and how quantum-level precision sharpens your field into a timeline magnet. We go forward. General intentions create general outcomes. Unclear goals generate blurry results. This is not just common sense, it's a quantum fact. Because in a probabilistic universe, precision is what determines which version of reality collapses around you. Without it, your signal lacks definition. And without definition, the field has nothing stable to resolve. Your future doesn't just depend on your energy. It depends on the clarity of that energy. Too many people walk around saying things like, I want to be successful. I want to feel free. I want to live my purpose. These statements sound empowered, but they're not structurally useful. They're energetically vague. And vague signals collapse into unstable outcomes. Timelines that fluctuate, stall, or fragment under pressure. This is why people spin in circles for years, doing the work, setting intentions, yet seeing minimal change. They aren't aiming precisely enough to generate coherence. The quantum field is not mystical. It's exact, and it reflects back the sharpness or the sloppiness of your internal broadcast. So if your intentions are fuzzy, you collapse fuzzy realities. This is where quantum precision comes in. It's not just about specificity of goals. It's about alignment of identity, frequency, and clarity, down to the smallest level. Let's bring this into focus. Think of 2 people with similar goals. One says, I want to be in shape. The other says, I train 5 days a week because I'm a high-performance athlete. Same desire, completely different frequencies. The first is wishful. The second is resolved. The first broadcasts uncertainty. The second broadcasts precision. And in the field, only the second timeline stabilizes, because it's coherent. Now let's examine how vagueness collapses potential. When your goal is vague, your nervous system doesn't know how to organize itself. You can't activate full commitment to a fuzzy target. So your attention splinters, your actions scatter, your emotions waver, and the field mirrors that fragmentation. Not because you failed, but because you didn't define what success even looks like in your chosen timeline. The solution isn't more effort, it's more clarity. Precision cuts through distortion. It sharpens your frequency like a laser, and the field stabilizes accordingly. Precision has 3 levels. Cognitive precision. This is clarity in language and intention. You must know exactly what you're aligning with down to the detail. Not, I want to be wealthy, but I generate X in monthly income through Y value delivered. Not, I want to be peaceful, but I operate from internal silence even when my external environment is chaotic. Words structure thought. Thought structures signal. Signal structures reality. Emotional precision. This is the alignment between your goal and your felt sense. You must train your nervous system to feel the outcome as normalized, not foreign. When you access that emotional signature clearly, you reinforce the signal with full-body coherence. Vague emotions send mixed instructions to the field. Precision generates stability. Identity precision. This is the most foundational layer. Who are you when the goal is already resolved? Not who you want to be, who you are. You don't become the identity after the outcome arrives. You stabilize the identity so the outcome can arrive. That identity must be clear, down to tone of voice, posture, habits, boundaries, preferences, patterns. Every detail matters because every detail transmits frequency. Now here's the myth. People think specificity limits possibility. But in the quantum field, the opposite is true. The more specific your identity, the more sharply your timeline resolves. You're not closing doors. You're closing distortion, so the path can finally open. Precision is not just for high achievers. It's the language the field responds to, because only defined signals can be anchored into coherent outcomes. The rest gets filtered as noise. Let's walk through an application model. Define the outcome with sensory clarity. What does it look like, feel like, sound like, smell like? If the version of you who lives that outcome walked into the room, how would you recognize them? Refine emotional congruence. Practice feeling from the outcome, not toward it. Drop any emotional state that contradicts the version of reality you're targeting. Act as a stabilizer. Don't try to move toward the goal. Reinforce patterns that match the reality where that goal already exists. That's how you collapse the timeline. This isn't visualization. It's quantum design. And it requires more than a mood board, it requires accuracy. Because the field doesn't misinterpret frequencies. It delivers exactly what your signal commands. So the question becomes, what is your signal commanding right now? Is it diluted by self-doubt? Compromised by old conditioning? Filtered through someone else's dream? Or is it precise, self-generated, identity-aligned? Only one of those will restructure your timeline. Next, we'll look at time itself, not as a linear experience, but as a flexible variable that responds to coherence. Because delay is not about external resistance. It's about signal instability. Let's keep moving. We've been taught to view time as a straight line. Past, present, future. Cause, effect. Step by step. But that model is a simplification. In the quantum framework, time is not constant. It's not fixed. It's not one-directional. Time is a variable subject to your coherence, your signal strength, and the identity frequency you're broadcasting, which means that delay isn't real in the way you've been taught. It's not an external barrier. It's an internal gap. Most people experience delay between intention and outcome. They set a goal, visualize, wait, and wait, and wait, and in the waiting they begin to doubt, to overthink, to realign with the old identity. That doubt scrambles the signal, and the outcome destabilizes again. So they assume it's not the right time. But what's actually happening is far more subtle. The timeline is flickering due to frequency inconsistency. Let's decode that. In the field, every timeline exists now. Not later, not someday, now. The only thing separating you from the reality you want is your energetic compatibility with it. And when that compatibility is fluctuating, the field cannot stabilize the new timeline. So it reverts you to the previous one over and over again, not as punishment, as response. This explains why some breakthroughs feel instant. It's not because they happened faster. It's because the signal reached critical coherence, and the field locked in. And what seemed to suddenly shift had actually been fluctuating beneath the surface, waiting for coherence to sustain. This is the mechanism behind delay. It's not time dragging its feet. It's your signal failing to remain stable long enough for the field to resolve a new configuration. Now here's the key insight. Time bends in response to coherence. The clearer, cleaner, and more consistent your signal, the faster outcomes resolve. This isn't a metaphor. It's an energetic law. When you operate from your resolved identity state, timelines condense. Because the field no longer has to negotiate conflicting data. It receives one clear instruction and follows it. So how do you collapse the delay? By removing the energetic lag between who you are now and who you're trying to become. You shorten the gap by being that version of you now. Fully, repeatedly, without deviation. This is not mental. It's behavioral. It's emotional. It's structural. You don't wait to feel how you'd feel in the new timeline. You access it now. You don't wait to make decisions like the upgraded version of you. You do it now. Because every delay is a delay in embodiment. And every acceleration is a result of stabilized coherence. There's a reason certain shifts happen after years of trying. Not because the timing finally arrived, but because the version of you who could hold the outcome finally stabilized. That's when the field says yes. That's when time bends. And what once seemed distant becomes immediate. So if something feels delayed in your life, ask, where am I still wobbling? What emotional states are interrupting the signal? What actions contradict the identity I claim to embody? Then clean the frequency, not once, every day, until the timeline resolves. One of the most powerful tools here is emotional stabilization. If you can hold the internal emotional signature of the timeline you're aiming for, regardless of current evidence, the delay collapses faster. Because emotion is signal amplifier, and consistent emotion equals timeline magnetism. Another key, decisions. Your current decisions are either stabilizing your desired timeline or sustaining your old one. There's no in-between. So if you want to collapse delay, collapse indecision. Become exact, unwavering, identity consistent, because the moment the field detects sustained clarity, it reconfigures to match. Time isn't dragging you forward. It's responding to your signal. And the faster you become coherent, the faster time becomes irrelevant. Next, we'll synthesize everything we've covered into one complete transformation map. A model for rewriting reality not through force but through frequency stabilization. We now close the loop. This is where everything converges. Every distortion you've experienced. Every delay, every relapse, every confusion about why change wasn't sticking can be traced back to a single truth. You were working from the outside in, trying to push external conditions into place, hoping the internal world would catch up. But in quantum systems, it doesn't work that way. Reality doesn't shift through force. It shifts through field alignment. And field alignment begins within. Everything you've been taught about self-improvement, from discipline strategies to goal structures, was filtered through a Newtonian lens. Cause and effect. Input equals output. Progress over time. But reality doesn't unfold in steps. It unfolds in states. And the state that determines what you experience is not your action. It's your frequency. That frequency originates from one place, your self-concept. Your field broadcasts who you believe you are. That belief becomes your filter. That filter becomes your reality. To change your life, you must stop working on your life and start rewriting the self that's projecting it. Not superficially, not cosmetically, fundamentally. Let's be exact. You do not attract outcomes. You do not chase timelines. You do not earn your next version of life through effort alone. You select them, and the selector is your stabilized identity field. If your field broadcasts scarcity, the field reflects scarcity. If your field broadcasts confusion, the field reflects unclear paths. If your field broadcasts coherence, the field stabilizes success. The field is not personal. It is precise. So what's the process of rewriting reality from the inside out? Step 1. Collapse the illusion of effort-first change. You must understand that no action, no matter how disciplined, is powerful enough to override a misaligned field. Action must emerge from alignment, not reach for it. When behavior comes from coherence, the timeline begins to stabilize instantly. When behavior comes from force, the timeline fluctuates, then collapses. Step 2. Design the identity architecture. Stop asking, "What do I want to achieve?" Start asking, "What version of me already lives inside the reality I'm selecting?" That version already exists. Not as fantasy, not as potential, as probability. Your job is not to chase them, it's to stabilize as them. To do this, define that identity in extreme detail. How do they respond under pressure? What emotions are familiar to them? What thoughts are irrelevant to them because those thoughts simply don't survive in that timeline? How do they make decisions? What do they no longer entertain in relationships, routines, or responsibilities? This isn't about imagining success. This is about encoding a frequency strong enough to override the one you're currently living in. Step 3. Audit your current signal. Where are you leaking energy? Where are your actions betraying your target identity? Where do you still react like the version of you that no longer aligns? Those aren't flaws. They're indicators. Every misalignment is a frequency you've normalized, and every time you reinforce it, you delay the timeline you're trying to stabilize. Now the shift begins. Start living in the broadcast of your chosen identity, daily. This is not about pretending. It's about precision. You are not faking confidence. You are expressing the version of you who already owns it. You are not forcing success. You are behaving in alignment with the field that already reflects it. Every small, repeated signal reinforces the field. And the more coherent that signal becomes, the faster the field reorients. This is where quantum change occurs. Not in the breakthrough moment, but in the consistent maintenance of broadcast integrity. Because the field doesn't respond to spikes of inspiration. It responds to stabilized identity resonance. Let's break this into real-time behaviors. Speak only from the state you're stabilizing. Don't narrate limitation, drama, or self-doubt. Move with the precision of someone who has nothing to prove. Refuse to emotionally identify with echoes of old timelines. Observe them, but don't embody them. Make decisions without consulting your history. Your past does not have clearance to influence your future signal. And when old patterns surface, because they will respond as the new self, not as the one you've outgrown. Consistency is more powerful than confidence. Because the universe doesn't need you to feel certain, it needs you to broadcast stability. And that stability doesn't come from affirmations. It comes from pattern congruence. Thoughts, emotions, behavior aligned. No conflict, no wobble, no second guessing. That's what tells the field. This is real, and reality adjusts accordingly. Let's talk sustainability. Quantum shifts are not one-time epiphanies. They're system upgrades, which means you don't just access a new identity, you maintain it, even when no one sees it yet, even when the external world still reflects the old, even when nothing looks different yet, because the field always lags slightly behind the frequency shift. It's not because it's slow. It's because it's verifying signal consistency. And once that verification completes, the timeline resolves. Fast. Most people collapse their upgrade too soon. They try it for a week, see no changes, and regress. But change was already happening, just not visibly. The frequency was still anchoring. The field was still adapting. And all they had to do was hold. But they blinked. And the old reality snapped back. This is why emotional regulation is so critical in this work, because panic, doubt, and overcorrection fracture the field. They introduce incoherence, and incoherence resets the signal. So you must become the calmest person in the room regardless of chaos. You must become the most certain person you know regardless of circumstance. Not because you're in denial, because you're stable. And stability is the final phase of identity reconfiguration. Here's the truth. You are not creating your future. You are stabilizing it. You are not healing your past. You are detaching from the broadcast that sustains it. You are not hoping for success. You are aligning with the self who already lives inside it. Every external change is a reflection, and the mirror does not lie. If your life isn't changing, your signal isn't either. And that's not a verdict. That's an invitation. Because the moment your signal becomes coherent, the moment your identity stops wobbling, the moment your actions, emotions, and thoughts lock into sync, the field listens, and the reality you thought was far away, it shows up like it was always there. Because in truth, it was. You just weren't tuned to it until now. So stop chasing. Stop waiting. Stop wondering when it will happen. Stabilize the version of you that no longer needs to ask. Because they're already living it. And now, so are you.